Hi, I'm Margot Leitman, and I tell true stories for a living and teach others all around the world to do so. I initially come personally from a performing arts background. I have a degree in theater, and I've worked professionally in the entertainment business for many years. But for me, it wasn't until I learned how to tell my own story that my business really started to take off. So many of us separate our story from our business's story, but I truly believe that they should be intertwined. So, inspired by some of my favorite authors, which for me are David Sedaris and Spalding Gray, you should look them up if you're interested in live storytelling, which is what I do. About 12 years ago, I wanted to make a career switch from live performing theater, stand-up comedy, etc., to this then uncharted world of storytelling, which wasn't as big then as it has become since. I sat down for lunch with my business manager and I told him all about what I wanted to do. I want to tell stories. I want to teach people how to tell stories. I want to do it live. I want to public speak. I want to do all of these things. And my business manager said, well, that's not a job and that's not a thing. So I said, well, why don't I make it a thing? And he told me, no, please don't do that. That's not possible. So what I did to repay him for that was I ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, and the company paid for it. And then I used his lack of belief in my dreams as motivation to make it happen. And once my dream did happen, I found myself obviously a new manager. Nothing inspires me personally more than someone telling me that something isn't possible. I stayed true to my vision of wanting to bring personal storytelling to the masses. And 12 years later, I'm in a place professionally that girl across the table at that lunch table never would have dreamed. And I love to tell people my business origin story. It's vulnerable, it's true, and it's authentically me. And the other way I could tell that story is, well, I told some stories on stage and live performances and then eventually built a business from that, which is also another way of telling a true story. But there's nothing personal to attach to the second option. There's no stakes, there's no vulnerability, there's no characters, there's no plot, there's no rise, there's no someone to root for. People truly tap into emotions of being an underdog, rising up against obstacles. That's something we can root for. People tend to tap into the emotion behind what is happening in a story, even more so than what is actually happening in that story. So think about your origin story of why you do what you do for a living. Really go back. What inspired you? We aren't really that into that you looked for a job and applied online and look, here you are. That doesn't really attach to people. We want to know the emotions behind the journey of how you got here. We want to know the ups and downs, what you originally thought you wanted to do, what you studied in school and then made a switch, what inspired you to get into this field. That's what an audience can tap into, not the plot of how you applied for a job. Also, audiences tap into relatable characters. They really want to see themselves in you. So next time there's a book or a movie or a TV show that you really like, ask yourself why it is that you like it so much. Perhaps it's just because you relate to the character. Because deep down, we're all really selfish. We want to believe that story we are hearing or reading or watching is actually all about us. Find a way to explain yourself as a character that gets through and relates to your audience. It needs to be really brief and to the point. We don't need to know your whole resume of your whole entire life. But why am I rooting for you? Why am I relating to you? I give my storytelling clients often the prompt, first one on the screen here. I'm the type of person who blank. And I have them write it down and fill it out until they run out of ideas. So examples of this could be, I'm the type of person who gets really angry when people cut in line. That's a wonderful answer I got once, and a woman then told a whole story about an incident with that completely defined her entire character, and she became someone that we really, really rooted for. Another example is, I'm the type of person who will do anything I can to avoid flying. And then I would love to hear a story of the lengths you went to, the boat, to the car, to the train, to the walking, to the subway, to the taxi, that you did to get from here to there, anything to avoid flying. There's probably a great story in there. Both of these examples will lead us to ask the storyteller to tell us more. Because as storytellers, we want to leave our audiences wanting more, not just wishing you would shut up already. It also helps to develop yourself as a character. So if you take time to answer these questions of why would I root for you? This is an essential piece in storytelling. If we don't root for you, we tune out, or worse, root against you. What qualities within yourself would make an audience want to see you succeed? I talk a lot in my stories about how I was bullied a lot growing up in my hometown. And that's an authentic piece of me, yet it also makes an audience want to see me rise above that. So think of qualities within yourself that make you an underdog. For example, I moved across country where I have no family or support in the start of my own business, and I became stronger for that. Think of something like that. Why are you someone that we root for that is an underdog? Additionally, another fun thing to figure out is, what are your quirks? What makes you distinctly you? A quirk is something like, you only use green soap, or you're terrified of spiders, or something like that. Those are the little things that make you unlike anyone else. They're great ways to convey who you are as a character. Additionally, think of what you stand for as a person. I hear companies all the time declare what they stand for, and that's great. Here at this company, we stand for family. Here at this company, we stand for the rights of our clients, etc. And that's not a bad thing, but it might not hurt you to just know this and to make a list of what it is that you personally stand for as well. Moving on. As humans, we don't tend to attach to big, broad strokes or facts or numbers. We actually retain personal stories. Why do you think it is that people don't attach to facts? People always ask me this. I mean, wouldn't life be easier if we did attach to facts? But it's hard to remember all of that. We just get behind stories and people. For example, fact, 1 in 8 couples struggle with fertility in trying to have a baby. Did you know that number, 1 in 8? I didn't. Probably you didn't either. However, could you think of a story of either a celebrity or a friend or family member or possibly your own story who's had a fertility struggle? I bet you can remember a detail from someone else's journey of trying to have a baby. We attach to that and we remember that story, but we don't remember the statistic because audiences retain a personal experience. And it's very important to convey one personal experience in great detail rather than a list of a bunch of small anecdotes. So again, you want to go into great detail. You want to tell us in great detail about the worst meal you ever had at a restaurant, for example. Tell me that in great detail rather than listing all of the bad foods you've ever tried. I'm not going to remember that, but I will remember one thing in great detail, and that is what a story is. A story is one story contained in great detail with a beginning, a middle, and an end, otherwise known in writing as an arc. Moving on. So let's talk a bit about story versus anecdote. Anecdote is a word that we hear a lot in storytelling, and many people ask, well, what's the difference between a full story and an anecdote? An anecdote, not antidote, as some people confuse it with. Anecdote is a short story that amuses people. It could be told at a party or dinner table, etc. It may be, it's nothing that has a big purpose or is very long. This is a funny thing that happened in my day, and I want to share this with you. A story is something longer, again, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the big thing is that a story contains change within you as the main character. Remember, you are at the center of your story. You do not want to tell someone else's story. For example, you don't want to tell the story of how your parents met. That is the story for them to tell. You might want to tell a story of something funny that happened between you and your parents. That is your story to tell. But ask yourself this: am I the main character in my own story, or am I the supporting character? You really want to be at the center of it, because I don't think you would like someone else going off and telling your story, right? So be respectful in that and keep yourself at the center. And a big thing with that is that a story contains a change within you as the main character. It's important to remember that all stories are about change. Who are you at the top of the story? And who are you at the end? Are you in the exact same place from the beginning to the end of your story? Then perhaps it's not a story worth telling. For example, if you begin your story hating horses, and then go horseback riding, fall off a horse, and then end your story hating horses, that's not much of a journey for us to go on as an audience with you. The change doesn't have to be huge. You don't need to start your story married and then end your story divorced, which you could, and that would work. You could also just simply hate dating at the start of your story, and then at the end be open to dating. That would be enough. There just needs to be a shift in you through this story. Moving on. Think about this. One of my favorite expressions is comedy equals tragedy plus time. So think about this. Are you ready to share this particular story? I see a mistake a lot in storytellers, which is that they tell a story that isn't completely over, meaning they have no ending because that story is still going on. As an audience, we want closure, not to wonder, is she going to be okay? We don't want that. I always ask storytellers to dive in and figure out, are they really over something? Telling a story about getting fired the day after you got fired from your job may really not be a great idea. Years later, telling that story and showing us how that firing led you to be where you are professionally could be a great thing. That is perspective. That's understanding what the story is really about. The other thing is, in perspective, it's a key to storytelling. At the time of the firing, maybe you thought the incident was about not being good enough, but now in hindsight, you realize it was really about learning a good work discipline. Only time gives you that understanding to look at things via the big picture. People often ask me, well, how much time should I take between something happening and telling it? And I always ask, it's just, can you see what it was really about? And can you get through that story without completely losing it? Because another big mistake I see, and I don't know if this is as common for you as it is for me, but I see people sobbing during a story. And it's okay to get a little choked up and emotional, although no one should ever fake cry in a story to get an audience to be emotional with you. I've seen it. I've seen the fake cry and I've seen the sobbing. Both of them not okay. I think it's okay if you get a little choked up telling a story of the loss of a loved one. But if you're sobbing hysterically and you can't speak, it's not a good idea to tell that story right now. You put it aside and you come back to it. I recently put away a story for 10 years and have just started telling it now. And you know what? And making it funny and jokey to overcompensate how I was really feeling about it because I wasn't ready to tell it yet. Another thing I see in storytelling is a lot of anger. And it's okay if you got upset in a moment and to convey that in a story. But if you're yelling at your audience to get your point across because you're so emotional about it still, it's truly not a good idea to tell that story yet. Okay. Great stories lie in the extremes. That's one of my favorite expressions. Think of your very worst job interview. I bet there's a story there. Now think of your very best job interview. Whether you got it or not, there's a story there too. When maybe you interviewed for a job, didn't get it, but met the love of your life. I always say, go to your best and your worst. Even in socially, my friend says, I've been dating lately. I say, well, tell me about your best date and tell me about your worst date. Everything else, I don't care about. I would love to hear about the worst place you've ever visited on a trip. I'm sure there's a story there. So generate stories by thinking about the best and worst days you've ever had at the job, at home, as a child, all of those things. It's a great place to start generating your story. Everyone has a story, and I feel strongly that connecting with strangers creates great stories for both you and them. There's nothing wrong with just hearing a wonderful story from a stranger that you may never heard. It's inspiring. We need as people to engage more, get off our phones and connect and hear what people have to say. So many people have amazing stories inside of them just waiting to be told, but because they don't work in a field where they get to have the option to do any public speaking, a lot of stories just reside inside their heads. And making an effort to just ask all types of people about themselves instead of disconnecting in our modern society can breed great connection. Because telling stories unites us and shows us how similar we really are. Another important principle I really believe in is living your life as a storyteller. That means leaving the house, trying new things, engaging in uncomfortable conversations, saying yes to new experiences, seeing different places in your community and the world. When things get weird, dive into the crazy. That's one of my favorite sayings. Inspiration is hard to find from your couch. And also, read, read, read. In order to tell great stories, you also have to consume great stories. So read as many books as you can to learn the art of narrative. So now I'm going to move on and discuss story structure with you. To tell a story, you begin with a brief intro as pertains to the story you are about to tell. Again, we don't need to know your whole life story. Then the body or the meat of your story is to tell a story that has changed or affected you in some way. That's it. Remember, we spoke a bit about change before. When you're picking a story, pick one that there is change within you. The story should contain conflict, whether that's internal within yourself or external between you and a nemesis. Often adding a nemesis or an enemy in your story makes us root for you more. It's a good tip. That story should rise to a climax. Without conflict, the story cannot rise to that. After the climax, it should have a resolution. We don't want to end the story with something like, and then the package came to my doorstep and did you open it? What was inside the package, etc. We need to have a resolution, right? And then a conclusion where we resist the temptation to spell out in the story what we have learned. Now, I understand in corporate storytelling, there is a big necessity to spell out your point and hit it really hard at the end. I'm talking about autobiographical personal storytelling in this. So what I mean by that is, instead of spelling out what you've learned, because I find it very insulting to an audience when a person says, and now I know that it's what's important to me in life is family, not money, or whatever. We understood that, we heard that, and maybe I was feeling something else at the end of your story. So please don't tell me how to feel. Instead, on a story, I prefer that an audience, a storyteller can end on a laugh. Again, you want to be authentic and not too jokey, but still having a funny closing line is a wonderful way to end the story. You can also tell us just simply what happened next as a result of the story that you just told. So what I mean by that is, you get fired. Let's go back to the job firing. You get fired from the job. A, B, and C leads you to where you are now. Here you are now. And what happens next is, oh, and by the way, I've just gotten a raise. Something like that as pertains to the story you are telling. Another way to end a story is that you've come full circle. You end your story where it begins. So you go back to the beginning moments of your story, find something there that you can come back to and go to that again. So obviously the example I use from cinema is The Wizard of Oz. It's a great example of a story coming full circle. You want your story to be authentic, meaning that you don't want to force a connection that isn't there. So the full circle is the rarest way one tends to end a story in my field. However, when it's authentic and true, it's wonderful. Another way to end a story is a PS or a tag. Where are they? The PS and tag, where are they now, is another way to end a story. So what it means is if maybe you worked in an ice cream parlor as a child, as a teenager, and what happened to that parlor, or what happened to the people that worked there. Or for example, I do a story about a gym I used to work out at, and I tell a whole story about this funny thing that happened there, and then at the end I say the gym has closed down, I walked past it recently, it's become this type of shop, etc. Or the people in your story, where are they now? What happened to them? Are you still in touch? Have you run into that person? One thing to remember is try to keep those interactions face to face, not too much on that you saw this person on Facebook. It's not as interesting. Okay. Very importantly, things to remember when telling stories. Keep it true. I know it sounds easier said than done, but an audience will know if you're making something up or exaggerating or lying. So please do keep your story true. Limit external characters. What I mean by that is, again, you are the star of your story, but also you don't want to have too many other people in your stories. 1 or 2 is fine, but when there's 6 friends that we need to keep track of, remember it's not a movie, we don't have visuals, it's very hard to keep track of that many people. So remember to limit how many others are in the story, and you can cut people as well if they're not essential to what's happening. Again, you are the star of your story, we talked about that. We haven't talked too much about this, and there's a lot of people out there that are talking about this concept of being vulnerable. But remember, you're not a bad business person or terrible at your job if you show any vulnerability. I always think about companies that talk about how they rose up from a hardship to become where they are now. That's vulnerability, and that makes us root for you more. So just remember that, and think about public figures that have shown vulnerability and that were rewarded for it if you're concerned about that. It's up to you how much you share and what your comfort level is, but just remember, it is a good thing to add some of that into your story. We talked about being over a concept, a story that you're telling, not in it. You definitely want to have some resolution on what happened. Be a clear character that we root for. So who are you as a character? Why am I rooting for you? Another thing I like is to be conversational, not presentational. I want to feel when I'm hearing you tell a story that we're engaging, that we're old friends, not that I'm hearing a presidential speech. So I often say to write your story the way that you talk, because it will help you remain in that conversational way, and audiences will really listen to you in that manner. Have broad, relatable themes. You want to overall, if you're telling a story, let's say, going back to that getting fired and then finding your dream job, you also want to have bigger themes in that story. For example, resilience, a theme of that, or a theme of overcoming hardship, or a theme of feeling lost in your 20s, etc. Big, broad themes also in a story about something personal will help us tap in. Have an arc, a beginning, middle, and an end. And less is more. I do feel that often people will tune out after a while. So if you're concerned and you want to add more, you might want to instead take away. It's just a wonderful lesson I've learned from a lot of experience. So story prep process. And I have all of this outlined in my new book, What's Your Story? But you write your story down word for word. And this is all on page 64 of your book. You write your story down word for word, and then you edit it a bit. Then you find a universal theme. Remember what I just talked to you about resilience, etc. And you write it down somewhere in your story. Then you break down your story into memorizable chunks, separating by ideas, not by what's my line, but what happened next. What is the section of this that I need to remember? Then write down the most vital things to remember in the margin of your story. From that, you go and you make what I call a beat sheet, which is just a simple outline of the most vital things you need to remember in your story. And then from there, hit the stage with the beat sheet, put everything down, and that's what you review before you tell your story. So you don't memorize your story word for word, but you don't improvise your story either and just talk, because that's when people make really big mistakes. This becomes a story map. I need to start here and end here and roughly hit these points in between. If you forget something here or there, it probably wasn't that important in the first place. Okay, so these are my books on storytelling. This is What's Your Story, a workbook for the storyteller in all of us, and this has just come out. And what it is it's guided prompts to help generate stories, ways for you to develop your stories and teaching you how to write and format them, and off you go, getting your stories out into the world. This book really holds you accountable to start generating ideas for stories, then composing your stories, and then instructs you how to start telling your stories in ways that you can do it. This is a book you write in. It has tons and tons of prompts in here. Blank is how I learned. I am really good at blank. And then you write until the story stops. There's also lists, 10 reasons why I do what I do for a living, writing that down. And additionally, it breaks down how to format, write a story, lots of lessons in here, templates for that, and major instructions to hold you accountable. So this really helps you get the stories out of your head, onto this page, and then out into the world. It's only available on paper because it is a workbook that you write in. Very, very valuable for storytellers, and that is a new release. My previous book is Long Story Short, the only storytelling guide you'll ever need. And this is a storytelling guidebook that really teaches you the ins and outs of live storytelling based on my 12 years of teaching experience. And I basically put my lesson plans into a full book here, used in college campuses all over the world and businesses and companies all over the world as well. So those are my two books. They're available wherever books are sold. And if you want to know at all about the business that I built in storytelling, I was able to build a business from scratch with private one-on-one coaching of people that want to share their stories. I do corporate workshops. I do a full course with I work out of a theater company in Los Angeles that I teach a full 8-session course out. Do public speaking on storytelling, workshops at various organizations, and then I perform live storytelling. And for any information on any of those things, you can go to my website, www.margotleitman.com, where I have all my info there.